Okay, so what I was starting to say is I think you have a better sense now of how hard it can be to find data. So if you're a biologist for Division of Wildlife and you're trying to manage populations of some species, and you're trying to manage habitat for that species, and you're trying to set aside areas, how do you know? How do you know what your population numbers are? Unless you've got a game species, so white-tailed deer are easy. Turkey are a little bit easier. Things that have bounties on them, foxes used to, coyotes do in some areas. I don't think in any counties in Ohio anymore. You know, those are things that you may get more data on. Some species are just almost impossible to find population size data on. When I worked as a watershed coordinator, and I wrote a watershed plan for Mill Creek and Yellow Creek in Mahoning County, and one of the pieces that you had to have if you were writing a plan was historical and current data on all aquatic species populations. Fish, insects, bivalves, that's like little mussels and clams in the creek. Yeah, you have to have information on all of that. See if they've declined, see if they've increased. I have to have what? And I ended up going to some folks in the fisheries section and some folks at Ohio State and saying, look, is there any data that you're aware of? And finally, after going through like everybody I possibly could, they said, no, there isn't. If you want data, you've got to go gather it yourself. Well, that also means right there you can't get historical data because you can only take data from today. So you're starting to see, I think, it's not as easy as, not all data has been collected. So there are certainly things that it's just, you know, even in the age of the internet, it's not, all the answers are not out there. You can't do a Google search and find anything you want. So, so that was, we've talked a little bit about population size. And some of you probably noticed some changes in population size. If you were able to find historical data, you may have noticed that, oh, at one time my species was really abundant and then they crashed. Or my species was completely extirpated from Ohio and they came back. Or my species didn't exist in Ohio and they moved in and their population numbers have boomed. And we're going to talk as we go through this chapter about what causes that to happen. Why do coyotes go from no coyotes in 1900 to what, did you get a current estimate?
Current estimate?
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
I know for whitetails, somebody in the other class, there were like 4 or 5 sources that showed an estimate for whitetails of like over 700,000 deer. You know, in 1970, there's an estimate of 17,000 deer. There are no whitetails in, 1904? You know, what changed? What made the environment so great for them? Why did their population numbers boom? So now we're going to talk a little bit about how species are spread out in an area. This is called dispersion. Okay, whoops. This is called dispersion. And the sort of textbook definition of this is the spatial distribution of individuals within a population. So we're talking about, you take a population, you take where they live, how are they spread out there? And there are 3 basic kinds of dispersions we're going to look at: clumped, even, and random. Okay? And be up to the next slide because we're going to talk about each of those in detail. These are sort of organized in order of most common to least common. So clumped distributions are the most random, or are the, good grief, are the most common. Okay? And this typically has to do with resources. So it's typically related to resources. And this is very, very common. Okay? Very common. This is the most common distribution you've got. Social behavior can lead to clumped distributions. Where you find one zebra, you will find a bunch of zebras. Where you find one gazelle, you will find a bunch of gazelles. How many of you are drivers already? Okay. Those of you who are not are often passengers. As you move into your driving years, I'll tell you this: if one deer crosses the road in front of you, don't assume that the event is over. Because they don't usually move all by themselves. I do my morning deer count, and This morning, the count was about 5 this morning. But, you know, that was a cluster of 5 deer altogether. Some mornings I see a cluster of 3 and then a cluster of 4. You know, a lot of species clump or they flock. Another reason that you'll get clumped distributions, now this is not only with animals, this can happen with plants. How do plants get a clumped distribution, you say? Pause. Anyway, so we've got here, you know, bushes and trees that are clumped along a river. Here we have bats that are clumped because their roosting sites are clumped. Very often, clumped distribution is related to resources. It can also be related to social things. You know, flocking behavior, behavior associated, social behavior. Who here has walked out on a spring night and heard dum, dum, dum. I can't even do toad trills. That's the 3 species who I can do. What are those? What are those? Not crickets. Frogs. Spring peepers. That's your spring peeper. That's your bullfrog. We'll see if you can get the last one. Yes, I have to make that stupid face when I do it. What's that one? Who knows? That's the green frog. That's the green frog. Guess what's happening in every little swamp in Columbiana County in the spring? It is an orgy. It is an absolute meat market. It is insanity. There are more hormones than at a high school dance. It's madness. And you've all been to high school dances. They're crazy. I don't even go. Whoa, it's too freaky. People are just all over the place. Yeah, I can't. Whoa. Yeah, it's insane. A swamp in the spring is this insane mass of hormonally driven craziness. They are all right there, and they all want the same thing. What kind of distribution is that? Clumped. How is that driven? Is that resource driven? Is that socially driven? Social, yeah. You want to be where all the other frogs are because you'd really like to reproduce with another cute little frog of your own species. Okay? This is the most common distribution, usually socially driven or resource driven.
Well, I don't think that or any high school.
Next kind of distribution, and this is the next most common, is even. This also can result, Gesundheit, from social behavior. So, how? Or ow? Ow. Okay, sorry. Clump distribution usually can result from social behavior or resource-driven behavior. Even distributions can also happen for a social reason. So, colonial nesting is an example of an even distribution. So is the V-pattern flight. How many of you have seen this? You've seen a V of geese go overhead. It's a beautiful sight. You know, they maintain an equal distance between each bird. That way they don't collide. They also get some advantages in terms of aerodynamics from being in that pattern. Even distributions also very often boil down to territory. So you may have, whoops, is everybody done with that one? Okay. You may have a little red fox. I'm drawing this badly, but there's a little bushy foxtail. Okay. It's a very incomplete little fox. That red fox will maintain a territory with its mate. And it will patrol the edges of that territory, and it will pee on the edges of its territory. If you have a dog, your dog will probably do this too. It'll mark the corners of its territory. Territorial species will tend to occupy a given area, and those areas tend to be somewhat regular. They will not get within a certain distance of another individual's territory. You have the same thing. There are birds that nest colonially. And they build their little nests at these regular intervals, and they will not be any closer than that to another bird of their same species. And it's social. It's about, hey, you, get out of my face. I want a wingtip's distance between us. Or I want my territory that will support my cubs. Okay? So territory, territorial concerns very often drive even distribution. Territory. So if you've got a territory to protect, that can result in an even distribution. Okay. The last kind of distribution we're going to talk about is really the rarest. Truly random distribution. Remember when we talked at the very beginning of the year about scientific methods and we talked about random? Random is actually tough to achieve. Random sometimes doesn't look random. Random is a kind of a challenge. When there is no thought on the part of the species that's being distributed, that's when you get a random distribution. Did you not have any blanks on this slide? Did I screw that up? Okay, you have blanks. Oh, never mind. Okay. Yeah, two different sets. I get it. Plants are one of the few things that will get a real random distribution. Plants whose seeds are spread by wind. So name me a plant whose seeds are spread by wind. Dandelions, classic example, yeah. Maple trees. What about oak trees? How do oak trees' seeds get spread? They fall out of the tree. Huh? Squirrels. Squirrels bury a whole lot more acorns than they ever find again, and a lot of those planting sites end up being where acorns sprout. Is that random? Mm-mm. Squirrel's got a plan. Now, I don't know what it is. I haven't been a squirrel that I can recall. But, it's not random. Things that are dispersed by wind. The other one is there are some species in the deep blue sea whose little offspring have no way of propelling themselves, and they just drift with the current. Jellyfish. Adult jellyfish can actually move themselves intentionally through the water. Larval jellyfish, so jellyfish have a larval stage, some species, and those little larvae, they don't look like a jellyfish. I drew that to give you a clue, and you picked up on it. Thank you. Larval jellyfish just kind of look like these little dots. They don't have any tentacles? No. No, they don't look like what we think of as a jellyfish. And they just are dispersed through the ocean. There are species in aquatic environments that don't control where they go. They're just dispersed. And that's among them. Okay, so here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to have a template on distribution. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to research on your species and look at distribution patterns in your species. This is easier than the population numbers. I mean, I told you that was going to be tough, and it is tough. But it's still kind of challenging. You're going to have to read through some material. For instance, if your species is one that forms packs or lodges where families live together, or forms herds, or forms harems, or if it's solitary for most of its life. Your species also may have more than one distribution pattern. If you have a species that's solitary for most of the year, but then once or twice a year everybody comes together, then it may have an even territorial distribution for part of the year. It may have a clumped distribution for part of the year. So you're going to have to go back to looking at those behavior notes. The behavior notes from Division of Wildlife are really a good place to start. Okay, So that's what we will do tomorrow. We'll probably also have a quick recall quiz when you walk in on the content from today. If anybody has additional population size stuff that they want to show me for more points, they can do that. Other than that, that's it for the day.